Back to the Future 2 is a terrible movie. Even if you think you already agree with me, I can tell you now, this movie is so much worse than you remember. Check the internet and you'll hear things like, oh, Back to the Future 2 is just a little overstuffed, but the high points far outweigh any of the bad. It is baffling to me that a film with as many glaring issues as this one, a film that fundamentally destroys the characters of its beloved predecessor, has gotten away with only mild disinterest at worst, and is considered by some to be the peak of the trilogy at best. The number of parallels that can be drawn between this abominable piece of shit and the numerous terrible nostalgia-bait sequel slop that comes out of Hollywood today is not insubstantial. Back to the Future 2 is not simply a case of an overrated film. What we have here, gentlemen, is an example of a film which is underhated. So, let's break this piece of shit down, shall we? Also, I will be using references from Back to the Future 3 to bolster my arguments against the film. Since both movies were made at the same time, it should be considered fair to take the continuity from the third film as something they would have been aware of when making this one. Got it? Okay. To break this movie down, we're going to need to start before... after... fuck it. The point where Doc Brown leaves here in the original film. What he did after that. What caused him to come back to 1985 in a panic at the end of Back to the Future 1? So, Doc travels 30 years into the future, to 2015. He arrives in the future and makes a shocking discovery. It turns out that literally 2 days after Marty returned in the original film, he gets into a car accident, causing him to lose his ability to play the guitar and sets off a chain of events that ruins his and his future family's lives. So, knowing everything we do about Doc, he should absolutely, at the very least, attempt to use the time machine to fix Marty's life.
I can't tell you. It might make things worse. Marty, we all have to make decisions that affect the course of our lives. You've got to do what you've got to do. And I've got to do what I've got to do.
Oh, fuck. Remember, in the original Back to the Future, Marty was able to use the time machine to save Doc from being gunned down by terrorists. This was in spite of the fact that Doc refused to listen to Marty, arguing,
Marty, don't tell me. No man should know too much about his own destiny.
You don't understand.
I do understand. If I know too much about my own future, I can endanger my own existence. Just as you've endangered yours.
No! Marty! We've already agreed that having information about the future can be extremely dangerous. Even if your intentions are good, it can backfire drastically.
Marty is only able to get his message to Doc because Doc repairs the note that Marty left him in 1955. Prior to repairing the note, Doc would not have known that this was to save his own life, only that it was to warn him of something in the future. And when Doc did repair the note, he was willing to take the precautions necessary to save his own life, because...
Well, I figured. What the hell? I can't tell you. It might make things worse.
Doc was willing to risk the space-time continuum to save his own life, and he was only able to do this because of Marty, because he placed his friendship with Marty above the space-time continuum. This is the man who just saved Doc's life, and the fact that Doc is unwilling to do the same, to save his best friend, turns this moment from the original film
You're alive. How did you know? I never got a chance to tell you. What about all that talk about screwing up future events, the space-time continuum?
Well, I figured. What the hell?
From a moment that showcased the trust between two friends into a moment that showcases Doc Brown being a selfish asshat. When it's his own life, he'll repair the note, he'll risk the space-time continuum. But when it's Marty's life?
Marty, we all have to make decisions that affect the course of our lives. You've got to do what you've got to do. And I've got to do what I've got to do.
Not only does this turn Doc into an asshole, it also turns him into a fucking idiot. Does he really think that there's no way to save Marty without telling him about his own future? You have a time machine, and now, thanks to Mr. Fusion, you no longer have to worry about fuel. You have infinity prep time and a potentially uncountable number of resources. Just go back a day before Marty gets hit by the car and rig the engine not to start. Drive in front of the car and create traffic. Maybe try and teach Marty a lesson about the things he'll need to learn to avoid the accident. Because even you know the reason that the car crash happens.
Marty, you can't go losing your judgment every time someone calls you a name. That's exactly what causes you to get into that accident in the future.
You could at least give a shit. By the way, the reason I have to keep using this clip from Back to the Future 3 is because it is literally the only time in either Back to the Future 2 or 3 that Marty and Doc even talk to each other about the car crash. But wait, if Doc didn't return to 1985 to warn Marty, why did he go get Marty and Jennifer to come to 2015 with him?
Look what happens to your son!
Within 2 hours of his arrest, Martin McFly Jr. was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 15 years in the state penitentiary?
Oh, it gets worse. Next week, a daughter attempts to break him out of jail, and she gets sent up for 20 years. You see, this one event starts a chain reaction that completely destroys your entire family.
What the fuck?
Why in the fuck do you care about saving everyone else in Marty's family, but not Marty?
I backtracked everything to this one event. That's why we're here today, to prevent this incident from ever happening.
You backtracked everything to here? Fucking what? We know that you know about Marty's car accident.
Marty, you can't go losing your judgment every time someone calls you a name. That's exactly what causes you to get into that accident in the future.
So Doc's plan to save the rest of Marty's family, but not Marty because Marty can't know about his own future for some reason, is to take Marty into the future so he can pretend to be his own son. Also, he needs to bring Jennifer along because this concerns her too. But also, he doesn't need to bring Jennifer, so he puts her to sleep in the car. Then, instead of just keeping her in the car, Doc decides to leave her in an alleyway because Doc Brown is supposed to be intelligent, yet he comes up with this insane fucking plan to save Marty Jr., when all he needs to do is leave Marty a note in 1985 that says, "Do not open until 2015," aka the same thing Marty did in the first film. Once again, Doc, you have a time machine, infinite prep time, and a potentially uncountable number of resources. Why did you need to arrive 10 minutes before Marty Jr. makes the deal with Griff? Why didn't you bring more of the sleep inducer since they were vital to your retarded fucking plan?
Great Scott, the sleep inducer. I was afraid of this. Because I used it on Jennifer, there wasn't enough power left to knock your son out for a full hour.
Even if old Biff wasn't at the cafe, would Doc not consider the idea that when trying to convince Marty Jr. to do the heist with him, Griff would bring up his father's situation? This insane plan to save Marty's family is the thing that starts the story of both Back to the Future 2 and 3. Without it, these movies wouldn't happen. It's all built upon something that fundamentally destroys Doc Brown as a character. He no longer gives a shit about Marty, and now he's a fucking retard who can't understand that he has access to a goddamn time machine. Remember when Doc decided to leave an unconscious woman in an alleyway for no reason? Turns out, this was a bad idea, because now the police have found her and assume that she's the Jennifer from 2015, since they share the same thumbprint. Now you might be thinking, if just the thumbprint is enough to trick the police officers into thinking that Jennifer is from 2015, then surely Marty should be easily able to convince the police officers that he's the Marty from 2015, and that he can take Jennifer home. Well, neither Doc or Marty think of this.
We gotta stop him.
What are we going to say? That we're time travelers? They have us committed.
I get that Doc Brown's a retard now, but even Marty should be able to think of this. Even when I was a stupid child watching these movies, I thought of this. And I actually am retarded. Well, okay, let's say the police take Jennifer home, and Jennifer runs into her future self. What's the worst that could happen?
I foresee two possibilities. One, coming face to face with herself 30 years older would put her into shock and she'd simply pass out.
See, that doesn't sound so bad.
Or two, the encounter could create a time paradox, the results of which could cause a chain reaction that would unravel the very fabric of the space-time continuum and destroy the entire universe.
I'm sorry, what? That can happen? You can potentially destroy the entire universe. Why? Why would you write this? Whose idea was this? Why? So now that the stakes have been ramped up from 0 to 1 times 10 to the power of 24, let's take a moment and rewind a few minutes.
Hey, McFly! You're Marty McFly's kid, aren't you? Biff? Must be rough being named after a complete butthead. Your old man? Mr. Loser? Loser with a capital L. Marty McFly, Sr.? The man who took his life and flushed it completely down the toilet? I did?
Oh hey Doc, it seems like Marty found out that something bad's gonna happen. I guess taking him into the future was a bad idea. So now that Marty knows something's up, I'm sure he'll ask Doc about what old Biff was talking about. So yeah, Marty just doesn't say anything about this, and going forward, what Biff said in this scene is completely forgotten by everyone. If I went to the future, and I heard someone say this about me,
the man who took his life and flushed it completely down the toilet,
I would be fucking terrified. I would spend every waking moment of my life from that point trying to figure out what the fuck Biff was talking about. The fact that this moment is never addressed is just fucking bizarre. The first thing that Marty does after the mission to save his family is buy the almanac. Did he buy the almanac because of what Biff said to him? It doesn't seem like it. He isn't desperate to get the almanac back when Doc takes it off him. He never mentions this was his reason for getting the almanac later in the film. Speaking of the almanac, let's talk about Biff getting the almanac. Biff is only able to figure out that Doc Brown invented a time machine because he spies on Doc and Marty during this scene. He only spies on Doc and Marty because he recognized the flying DeLorean from 1985. And he only saw the flying DeLorean in 1985 because...
Hey, Marty! Marty! Marty, I wanted to show you these new matchbooks for my auto detailing I had printed up.
You wanted to show Marty your matchbooks? Why the fuck would Biff give a shit? It's almost as if Biff finding the almanac was incredibly unjustified, so they needed to contrive this stupid nonsense, and then add terrible ADR to old Biff in post.
Flying DeLorean? I haven't seen one of those in 30 years.
So Doc and Marty arrive in Marty's future neighborhood with old Biff tailing behind. Doc goes to get Jennifer while Marty stays behind with the DeLorean. Now, you might be wondering, if Marty's with the DeLorean, what's old Biff going to do? Well, you see, a dog walks past and he gets distracted. He just walks off. And then, despite only walking around the corner, he doesn't hear Biff doing this. Must have been the wind. Somehow, Doc manages to get Jennifer out of the house without anyone noticing. Like, seriously, this happens. And putting to one side the fact that we're lucky the universe didn't explode, not a single person hears this? Old Marty and his mother were right there. Doc and Marty carry Jennifer back to the time machine, just as Biff returns. Somehow, neither of them notice that someone's taken the time machine back to 1955. This is how the original Back to the Future explains the time machine.
First, you turn the time circuits on. This readout tells you where you're going, this one tells you where you are, this one tells you where you were.
The DeLorean has a specific panel that tells you what time it was when you last departed. At this point in the film, that panel should say November 12th, 1955. The obvious reason for a panel like this to exist is so that when you return to your present, you can return at the exact moment you left, which means that this is absolutely something Doc Brown should have seen and at the very least taken note of. Also, how the fuck did a geriatric Biff figure out how to operate the time machine? He somehow figured out where the time circuits were, and that he needs to turn them on, and that he needs to get the car up to 88 miles per hour? How? Also, as they're taking Jennifer back to the car, Doc says this.
And then I'm gonna destroy the time machine! The risks are just too great as this incident proves, and I was behaving responsibly.
Yes, Doc, this was all very responsible. The gang returns to 1985 and somehow neither of them notice the very obvious signs that something is wrong. Like, once Marty figures out something's up, it takes him seconds to find a crashed car and a fucking murder scene. But before, when Doc and Marty were travelling through Hill Valley, neither of them noticed. Well, that's not entirely true. Marty did take note of some things.
I remember bars being on these windows. What the hell?
But does Doc notice anything? No, because of course he fucking doesn't. It turns out that because holy shit, 45th US President Donald Trump, Spirit Science was right! So it turns out that Biff used the almanac to get rich, take over Hill Valley, ruin the world, kill George McFly, marry Marty's mother, and give Richard Nixon 4 terms? What the fuck? It's all a cool idea, just a shame it was all built upon absurd nonsense. Speaking of absurd nonsense, let's talk about this fucking scene.
Imagine that this line represents time.
Ah, wonderful. They're going to start explaining things. I'm sure everything here will make perfect sense.
Prior to this point in time, somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985.
Well, okay. It makes sense that Doc would have been able to deduce this.
Recognize this?
Oh shit, Doc. I do recognize that bag. Do you know who didn't recognize that bag? You! From 10 fucking minutes ago! I'm not a car expert, but from my understanding, there aren't exactly many places to hide something in a fucking DeLorean. And Old Biff wasn't even trying to hide the bag. Chances are, Old Biff just left it in the seat or on the floor. And neither of you noticed?
I found them in a time machine. Along with this.
Oh, fuck off.
Son of a bitch stole my idea. It's my fault. The whole thing is my fault. If I hadn't bought that damn book, none of this would have ever happened.
No, Marty, this really isn't your fault. I'd say this is the fault of the guy who created a retarded fucking plan to bring you and Jennifer into the future with little to no prep time, in spite of the fact that you had a time machine, knowing full well that doing so could potentially destroy the entire universe. The guy who decided it was necessary to leave Jennifer in an alleyway for no fucking reason. The guy who couldn't notice a fucking bag and a gold-tipped cane on the floor of his car. Dr. Emmett Brown, the retarded resistance. I'm sure that as Marty's close friend, Doc will tell Marty that this situation is actually entirely his fault.
Well, that's all in the past.
You mean the future?
Whatever.
Oh, fucking cunt.
It demonstrates precisely how time travel can be misused and why the time machine must be destroyed.
This is your fault. It is not the fault of the fucking time machine. You're the one who brought Marty into the future knowing he has issues.
You're losing your judgment every time someone calls you a name. That's exactly what causes you to get into that accident.
Biff got access to the DeLorean because of you.
Right, so we go back to the future. Stop Biff from stealing the time machine.
We can't. We travel into the future. From this point in time, it will be the future of this reality.
Wait, what the fuck? If Marty and Doc can't go back to the original 2015 because they're in the alternate timeline, then how did old Biff get back to the original 2015? He took the DeLorean back to 1955. In doing so, he created a new timeline, but that means he should have been sent to the new timeline's version of 2015.
In order to put the universe back as we remember it, we have to find out the exact date and the specific circumstances of how, where, and when young Biff got his hands on that sports almanac.
No. Just go back a day before the first horse race and get the almanac then. Again, say it with me. Doc, you have a time machine. You have infinite prep time and a potentially infinite amount of resources. There are an infinite number of things you can do.
I'll ask him.
What? You're just going to walk up to the ultra-powerful Biff in this timeline and ask him, you have a time machine. You have infinite prep. You fucking know the rest. Assuming that you even need to ask him, go back to before he became rich and famous and ask him then. Take any precautions? A gun, maybe? Anything? This scene is piss. Pure, unfettered cat piss. There is not a single fucking thing in this scene that isn't a glaring plot hole, a nonsensical contrivance, or something so out of character that it makes me think the characters have fucking Alzheimer's. Or something so out of character that it makes me think the characters have fucking Alzheimer's. So as it turns out, old Biff just so happened to go back to the exact date from the original film. Why?
Unbelievable that old Biff could have chosen that particular date. It could mean that that point in time inherently contains some sort of cosmic significance, almost as if it were the temporal junction point for the entire space-time continuum. On the other hand, it could just be an amazing coincidence.
Who fucking knows? But hey, at least the characters are smart enough to notice that the plot makes no sense. Maybe they'll keep being smart. Anyway, then they used the DeLorean to travel back to 1955.
Remember the lightning bolt at the clock tower?
Yeah.
That event doesn't happen until tonight, so you must be very careful not to run into your other self.
What the fuck? You two are coming here with the explicit intent to interfere with Biff. Without Biff, Lorraine and George won't get together and thus Marty won't exist. Just go back a day later. Then Marty could just re-infiltrate the school as Calvin Klein again and get the book from there. According to the Back to the Future wiki, Biff Tannen is 18 years old in 1955. And we know that Biff used the almanac to win his first $1 million when he turned 21 years old.
And how a trip to the racetrack on his 21st birthday.
Even assuming you didn't have access to a fucking time machine, you have 3 years to get the almanac. But yet again, Doc Brown comes up with an insane fucking plan that makes no sense and needlessly endangers literally everything ever. So Marty tracks down 50's Biff and hides in the boot of his car. Then...
You always did have a way with women. Get the hell out of my car, old man!
Editor, play that clip from before.
Marty, we all have to make decisions.
No, the other clip.
The encounter could create a time paradox, the results of which could cause a chain reaction that would unravel the very fabric of the space-time continuum and destroy the entire universe.
So here's Biff talking to himself, and they both didn't faint. But that means...
You want to marry that girl, Biff? I can help make it happen.
Old Biff gives young Biff the almanac, and a warning.
Oh, and there's one more thing. One day, a kid or a crazy, wild-eyed old man who claims to be a scientist is gonna come around asking about this.
Why wouldn't Old Biff just tell young Biff the name of Doc and Marty? It's not like Old Biff knows or even gives a shit about the space-time continuum. Wouldn't he try to give his younger self as much information as possible? I get that Biff's an idiot, but a character being an idiot doesn't exclude them from using common sense. Because Biff closed the garage door, Marty gets locked inside and calls Doc for help. Doc arrives at Biff's house just as Biff leaves again, with Marty still hiding in the back of his car. Marty proceeds to do some absolutely fucking nonsensical Stealth 100 bullshit in the back of Biff's car. There's a fucking mirror there, how does he not see him? As Doc is following Biff's car, he just so happens to ride into the town square where the original Doc is. There are only so many ways I can keep saying this shit. Doc, what the fuck? How the fuck do you accidentally ride into a place you specifically need to avoid? Does he not know where the town hall is? Could he not have just gone around it through a back street or something? Well, in any case, I'm sure that upon seeing the old DeLorean, Doc will immediately leave because, as established, meeting himself could destroy the entire—
Oh, I happen to have had a little experience in this area.
Yes. Well, I'm hoping to see some lightning tonight, although the weatherman says there's not going to be any rain.
Now, let's talk about continuity. Specifically, the continuity of these three. Biff's gang. Let's take the scenes from Back to the Future 1 and 2 and just look at everything these three do in chronological order. Since there are two Martys at this point in the film, I'll refer to the original Back to the Future 1 Marty as Calvin and the Back to the Future 2 Marty as Marty. So firstly, Biff tells his gang to go find Calvin.
Where's that punk Calvin Klein? Well, go find him. He caused $300 damage to my car. I'm Reed.
Then, Biff goes to assault Lorraine, and all of a sudden, his gang is with him again. Well, I guess they met up again? Okay. The gang then throws Calvin in the back of the Starlighter's car, and the band then chases them off. Then, Biff's gang finds Marty and chase him into the school's auditorium. They see Calvin on the stage with the Starlighters, and despite the fact that they just ran away from the Starlighters 10 minutes ago, they now decide,
Look, how'd he get up on stage? I don't know, but when he gets down, we're gonna nail him.
How the hell he changes clothes so fast?
so they go and stand directly underneath a bunch of sandbags, like it's a fucking Uncharted set piece. Because that way, Marty can conveniently stop them. Marty heads outside and finds Biff waiting for him. Due to some very stupid nonsense that I'll get into later, Biff is able to goad Marty into a fight. But then, Marty just so happens to get knocked out by himself, and his younger self just so happens not to notice either of them, which in turn causes Biff to get the almanac back. What the fuck? Doc meets up with Marty on the roof. There's some more Stealth 100 nonsense, and then they do that annoying shit where a character is running away from something, but every time the camera cuts, the thing gets further away. Like, there are at least two moments here where Biff should definitely just run Marty over, but doesn't. They get the almanac back, burn it, and restore the timeline. All seems fine, but then the studio says they need to make even more money, so Doc gets struck by lightning and sent to the sequel. Since most of its issues are just continued on from Back to the Future 2, I don't have plans to make a full video for the third film. Instead, I'm just quickly going to cover two things that bother the fuck out of me. 1. Marty meeting up with 1955 Doc and telling him about everything that happens in Back to the Future 2 should doom Doc's existence. If Doc thinks he lives past the end of Back to the Future 1, then he'll have no reason to fix the note from Marty, and thus will be killed at the end of Back to the Future 1. 2. Doc goes on an arc about listening to his emotions rather than being purely logical. This culminates in the finale, where he flies off into the sunset with his new waifu, leaving Marty to go back to a present where Doc believes he'll get into a car accident and ruin his life. Really listening to your heart there, Doc. So how the fuck did the people behind Back to the Future 1 fuck this up so tremendously? I put the blame on one choice, one incredibly unnecessary, incompetently executed idea that every single element of this script all unnaturally bended to include.
Chicken jockey!
Let me start this segment by defining my terms. When I say character development, I am referring to the changes a character goes through throughout a narrative. For something to be considered development, it must take a character's belief, trait, or relationship and convert it into a different state by the end of the story. Now that we've established what character development is, let's establish something else. Character development is entirely unnecessary for creating good characters or good stories entirely. What makes a character good is consistency. What makes a character bad is inconsistency. If you have a character who cares about his family members to the point of being willing to sacrifice himself to try redeem his genocidal father, consider killing their nephew because they had a bad dream, that is a bad character because they're inconsistent. The more complex a character is, the more traits and values that character holds, the harder it is to maintain consistency. Character development is the most common thing writers give characters to make them more complex. But just because it's the most common way of doing things does not make it necessary. The vast majority of sitcom episodes do not feature character development, but people still enjoy these stories because the characters in them remain consistent with their already established traits and values. The only character in the original Back to the Future who really has any character development is George McFly. And if you ask most people who their favourite Back to the Future character is, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say Doc or Marty, the ones that don't develop. Back to the Future 2 and 3 sacrifice the consistency of Marty McFly's character so they can give Marty character development. Now, for no fucking reason, every time someone calls Marty a chicken, he loses all self-control, like the person he talked to just passed a fucking charisma check. There is nothing from Back to the Future 1 that supports the idea that Marty would give a single shit if someone, especially Biff, thought he was a chicken. What makes this even worse is that every time this comes up in the movie, it's always the most over-the-top, on-the-nose fucking beat ever conceived in a story. This feels like it's something out of a fucking anti-bullying video they'd show you in primary school, not something that cost $40 million to make.
What's wrong, McFly? Chicken?
Whoa, what? Guys, don't be like my friend here who didn't do anything. Not doing anything is part of the problem.
The decision to give Marty an arc is patient zero to every other issue in the film. They can all be traced back to this. Why is Doc Brown an incompetent and immoral idiot now? Well, because if he told Marty about his future, we couldn't have the chicken arc. Why is the cause and effect so abysmal in so many parts of the movie? Well, because we need to contrive situations for the chicken arc. Why didn't the universe explode when Biff talked to himself? Well, because if everything in existence was erased, we couldn't have the fucking chicken arc. Before I get to my conclusion, I just want to quickly talk about a fan theory that relates to the chicken arc. just so that it's covered before anyone brings it up in the comments. The theory goes that because Marty changed his own past in the events of Back to the Future 1, that his memories would have changed, and thus, now having grown up in the shadow of his successful father, Marty feels insecure whenever someone calls him chicken. Firstly, this is not in the movie. There is nothing in Back to the Future 2 or 3 that would suggest that this Marty is a different Marty from the original film. Secondly, even if this was in the film, that would be shit. It would mean that the original Marty failed to save his own life in Back to the Future 1 and was supplanted by a new Marty without even recognizing. And thirdly, how the fuck does growing up with a successful father suddenly translate to Marty having a childish outburst every time someone like Biff calls him a chicken? Why the fuck would he care? If this theory is something you believe in, you are wrong and should feel bad. The original Back to the Future is nothing short of a masterpiece. It manages to create a narrative involving time travel that, aside from the occasional hiccup, stays consistent with its own established rules, all while maintaining a perfect equilibrium between witty comedy and human drama. Back to the Future 2 is fucking terrible. It fits right alongside the abhorrent, shit-stained sediment that's abundant in today's film industry. It turns Doc Brown into a selfish, amoral dumbass, and Marty McFly into an insecure, glue-licking retard. Any semblance of coherent time travel logic is beyond eviscerated, sent to the fucking Shadow Realm in favour of a nonsensical thread of plot points, each one inaner than the last. This film is way worse than you remember.
30 years.